Well, they've decided that any athlete, any tennis player from Russia or Belarus will not be able to participate in Wimbledon. And I guess this hasn't come as a surprise, really, because about a month ago we were given an indication of where they might have been heading. The UK Sports Minister, Nigel Huddleston, said that Russians would have to sign some sort of a pledge saying that they completely disagreed with the regime in Russia. So we knew that this was the direction they were heading in. And I guess it's in keeping with the whole UK government and their approach to the war in Ukraine, sending a very strong message to Russians that the actions of their leader will not be tolerated.
And what about the players and the wider tennis community, tennis organisations? How have they reacted to this?
Well, there's been a pretty strong reaction, actually, very quickly. Individual tennis players were coming out in the USA and around the world. But we also heard from the two tennis tour organisers, the ATP that runs the men's competition and the WTA that run the women's competition. They basically said that this is discriminatory, it's unfair, they don't support it. And in fact, the ATP went even further, saying that they think it might be in breach of the regulations and the basis in which the tennis players compete at Wimbledon, and nowhere does it say it has anything to do with nationality. It is simply based on the rankings, so they're in breach of that. We've also heard from Belarus. The Tennis Federation there says they may take a legal challenge against this, which would be interesting because we know there are about 10 cases at the Court of Arbitration for Sport in Switzerland which have been lodged by various sporting organisations inside Russia, basically complaining about the same thing, that their athletes have been banned from various tournaments and various sports around the world.
Hey, that's exactly right. As you say, there have been various sporting organisations that have banned Russian teams or individuals from competing in some way, shape or form. Where do we go from here? How does this develop from here on in?
Well, we're yet to see. There probably won't be any sort of legal ramifications because there just isn't the time frame that it would take to hear such a case. So I don't think it will go anywhere unless there's some sort of a backtracking in the Court of Arbitration for Sport, should they choose that route. But, you know, it has been condemnation from the players themselves, which has been quite interesting, and including one of the Russian tennis players, number 8, Andrei Rublev, who you might remember back in February was competing in Dubai and wrote on one of the TV cameras when he'd finished his match, "No war, please." And he's appealed to the organisers at the Lawn Tennis Association in London, saying, please let us play. Even if we sign something that says all of our money will be donated to a charity or various charities that can help people that are really suffering because of the war in Ukraine, but we want to be able to show that we are good people. And this is the conflict. I guess this is the great difficulty with sport when individuals, fall foul of the system because of political decisions. And it's a very awkward road to try and navigate. The International Olympic Committee, which is, basically one of the organisations that people look to in this regard, they have said that they've recommended to all sports, do not invite players from Russia or Belarus. But then you've got an organisation like the World Olympians Association, which some tennis players belong to as well, that have said, well, no, we don't agree with that because we believe as athletes competing as individuals, not from a particular nation, that we have risen above this sort of politics and we need to be able to set that example.
Tracey, wondering if you've seen any reaction from Ukrainian athletes, Ukrainian tennis players at all. What have they had to say?
Well, a lot of Ukrainian players, not just in tennis, but from sports right across the board, have said previously that they support this kind of a stance because they also want the toughest message sent. We have seen instances where some Russian athletes have stood on podiums or have turned up at events with the Z symbol, which is basically recognised as pro-war. But there's a lot of other Russian athletes who have spoken out, who've taken the Russian flag off their social media accounts. So there's a real division there. And a lot of people think that, unless the athletes themselves come and say we are against the war, they should not be allowed to compete in the sports where they still can. So there are a handful of sports like swimming, like cycling, like tennis tour, except for the Wimbledon tournament now, that allows athletes to compete. But we also know that a lot of the Ukrainian athletes, a lot of them based outside of Ukraine or once the war started made sure they didn't go back to Ukraine when they've been on their various sporting tours, are using this as some sort of, psychological psych-up to get the best that they can. And we've just seen that recently, just in the last week at the Invictus Games, where the Ukrainian team has come away with 4 gold medals, and they have been using the war to spur themselves on to greater heights and to be able to say, we're doing this for the people back home because we know what you're going through.
Tracey, just finally, this isn't the first time that sports and politics have mixed in this way, with teams, nations being banned from competing. Historically, does it ever have a positive effect?
Historically, what ends up happening is that the athletes end up paying a price, because the politics will be fought out on a multitude of other levels. Business also is fought on a completely different level. Sometimes we see that there's hypocrisy involved, and you might even say there's a level of that hypocrisy playing out here, where you see athletes who have been banned from competing, and yet officials or people who are involved behind the scenes that come from Russia and Belarus are able to continue doing what they do. We even see at the IOC where they've recommended players not be invited, yet the IOC members from Russia and Belarus are still recognised as members. So there's always a level of hypocrisy. The athletes do end up paying a price. But the one success that people always point to in this regard is South Africa. And they were banned from international sport for a very long time and helped bring about the downfall of the apartheid regime.
Tracey Holmes, thank you so much for your time and your insights as always.
Thanks, Isk.